Well, this is another Henry's Projects, but it's a little off of the normal mark. Um, this is how I make wine. Pretty palatable wine. And I must admit it's focused on one particular kind of wine and a very inexpensive way of making it. In this case, it's a plum wine. And I really don't like preservatives and I don't like additives and things. And so this is a pretty much organic kind of wine. So I'm going to outline what's going on here, and I'm going to always try to keep my YouTubes as short as possible and then make as many to cover the different aspects of it rather than like raving on for a long time or making a mistake. This is part two of Make Your Own Great Wine Inexpensively. So I've now put together these airlocks, and I do recommend this three-piece airlock. They're well under $1, and the only other airlocks that you can buy are basically two like sausage bubbles in a tube, and they're taller than this, which makes it difficult to find space to store. And also, if there's any reflux out of the fermentation chamber, like if you're making a really foamy beer or something, it'll come up and it'll contaminate that, and it's difficult to clean out, whereas these come apart completely and have this lid. To be honest, you don't need any kind of airlock at all. Is that you can do exactly what I'm doing, and I have done this, and simply put a piece of saran wrap over the top. And the great thing about these pressure vessels, these soda bottles, are that a rubber band will completely hold that saran wrap or that plastic wrap around it. And contrary to what you might hear, you don't need to poke a hole in it. The pressure will never get high enough that it won't leak around the rubber band, but it is an airlock, and it's quite effective. It really is. I use these because it's more predictable to me, and I can see the bubbles. And whereas a slow leak around a saran wrap cover, you can see the bubbles coming up from fermentation, but you can't really judge the volume of the gas. And the volume of the gas is directly proportional to how much alcohol is being produced in the wine or the beer. So these require that this cup inside be floated up, and then it burps out a bubble and it falls back down. So you get an idea of the level of fermentation going on. So now this is covered, but right now the yeast is still actually proofing. In about a half an hour, I will then mix this up again, and I will decant one at a time its amount. A little over a cup it's going to turn out into each one of these. And then I will put one of these airlocks in place, and I will add just enough hydrogen peroxide, standard drugstore gargling hydrogen peroxide, because that is in the airlock that keeps any kind of bacterial growth from going on, and things very quickly start to happen. This plum wine is drinkable in less than a week. If it's allowed to settle for another week, it's even better. And I'm sure that after racking it twice, I've actually had it be clarified wine. Hold it up to the light in a goblet and it looks really nice, and it's quite potent. We're talking about 18% alcohol, so that's about 36 proof. It's definitely into the range of being almost a cordial or a brandy, which helps to preserve it. But racking it will remove all of the sediments, and it will still be a live wine. However, there'll still be a few yeast hanging around even at 18% alcohol by absolute volume. So I'm just trying to go through this one step at a time, in that the next step is the airlocks and the addition of the yeast, and then we're ready to go for the run on fermentation. Alright, this is another video in the continuing series of how to make this plum wine. So I've already covered how you do this stuff with PET bottles and why, and the airlocks in the background. I do want to point out that this thing is a plum wine, and it's based on prunes, if you've been watching the other videos. And here's pectin enzyme. And, you know, no neophyte winemaker wouldn't have that in their collection, because that's, they sell you on all these ideas. It happens that some fruits have a lot of pectin, and that's the protein, I guess, that makes jellies into jellies. And if you have a fruit that doesn't have a lot of pectin, you even add pectin to make it gel. So that is the enemy of a clear winemaker, because the pectin does not ferment and it stays as a haze in the wine. So when you try to clarify the wine, you can't see through it because of this haze. So what they recommend is you take this pectin enzyme that dissolves that pectin and you put it in 12 hours before you ferment. It's supposed to reduce it. You can also use it after the ferment, but enzyme actions are inhibited by alcohol. So the higher you go in alcohol, the less useful this pectin enzyme is in the after product. Along with several other things, I don't use this anymore. I use prune juice because it seems to have a good balance of acid and minerals, and also non-convertible sugars. So I put the cane sugar in here because I know that it's going to be converted by the champagne yeast into 100% ethanol at about a 2-to-1 ratio. 2 cups of sugar will make a cup of ethanol. I also know that by adding in this prune juice, I'm adding natural nutrients that the yeast needs, but I'm also adding sugars that are not available to the yeast, so that even if this yeast ferments this up to 18% alcohol, it won't be able to eat up some of these different sugars, and there'll still be some sweetness to this, even though it's technically a dry wine because it's fermented all the way to the end. You don't get a lot of sweetness from those leftover sugars because they're really not predominant, and you don't get a lot of flavor out of the prune juice. But I will show some methods that are completely legal for concentrating this prune juice wine into something more advanced.